It's now my pleasure to introduce my good friend Sreall. Sarah teaches graduate courses on war and foreign policy at the Harvard Kennedy School of Government and serves on the Secretary of Defense's Defense Policy Board. She is also the founder and director of the Mass Atrocity Response Operations Project. And at Harvard, she was also the director of Harvard's Carr Center for Human Rights Policy from 2005 to 2009. During the Clinton administration, Sarah served as the first Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Peacekeeping and Humanitarian Assistance. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Sewell.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Rees, and I have to begin by thanking Mr. Nasser Rashidi and all of the Iranian American citizens of Northern California and their many friends and allies here in this room. It's also my first time joining you for such an event, and it's a privilege to be here and to be learning so much about the issues of concern to all of us gathered in this room. And I think it's only appropriate to start, because I haven't had a chance to do so, by offering my condolences to all victims of Iranian government violence and terrorism, and particularly to the victims in Camp Ashraf and their families here today. So, as I said, I'm delighted to be here. I'm not an Iranian expert. My background is broader and more generic, if you will. I really focus on the use of force in American foreign policy, and I focus on humanitarian issues in that context. And since I've been in academia for a while, I've grown to be accustomed to working with conceptual frameworks and sort of stepping up one step on the balcony and doing a little bit of analysis. And so I hope you'll forgive me if I revert to that role here. I like to think, because I served for 6 years as the Senior Foreign Policy Advisor to Senator George Mitchell on the Hill, that I have a good appreciation for the politics of international challenges, and I pride myself on caring a whole lot about how you actually get things to work in practice. And so with those as caveats to my academic leanings, I'm going to start by talking a little bit about American foreign policy more broadly, sort of step back from the issues that we're talking about, and then I'll move more directly into the issues of concern to you more immediately. So when I was first asked to come and join you, I began thinking about where this conglomeration of issues fits historically in the context of American foreign policy. And what's very interesting to me about the issues of Iran, about the issues of democracy in Iran, about the issues of human rights in Iran, is that often for the United States, we see a significant conflict in our foreign policy between the values that America has held dear and indeed was founded upon, and the interests of the United States of America as it plots its foreign policy and manages the affairs of state. And what is extraordinary about this set of issues is that in very important ways, values and interests are joined in a common framework for approaching the questions of Iran and democracy and human rights. So this clash that I often teach about in the conduct of foreign policy, which so often leads to inconsistency, to reversals of fortune, to charges of hypocrisy, actually has an opportunity to be reconciled in the context of the issues that we're talking about today. Now, this is in many ways the biggest strength that this community, that the community gathered here today, has as it seeks to galvanize action and draw attention to the very significant challenges in U.S. foreign policy. But it doesn't mean that the practical path is necessarily simple or easy. And academics like to complexify. And I spend a lot of my time working with communities that come to issues from very different perspectives. I've spent a lot of time in dialogue with the human rights community and the military community who share many of the same values but come from very different perspectives. And so I'm going to attempt slightly to complexify and perhaps point out some of the issues that for those who are convinced and who have personal experience and who have passionate commitment can sometimes do to refine their arguments and contextualize their analytic processes and their advocacy strategies, because I hope to give you a little bit of a context about what these issues might look like from an outside perspective so that you can better shape your analysis and argument in the service of your firmly held beliefs and the beliefs that most Americans strongly share. So in that context, I think it's very important for us to remember when we talk about the issues that motivate us that the United States is in a period in which it is really begun to look inward. It has been strategically innovated by two significant counterinsurgencies, regime change operations, and it has been tied in a bit of a knot, frankly, by its latest humanitarian intervention in the context of Libya. And so the country comes to this discussion from a perspective of wariness about regime change arguments, wariness about the use of military power, wariness about supporting allies just a little bit in the fear that that commitment will creep over time. And we have to be cognizant of that as we think about urging the United States to do the right thing in this context. And the other reality very much related, as it's no secret, you pick up the paper, I mean, the economic crisis that this country faces now, and in particular, the last week's roiling debate about brinksmanship with the economy speaks to a limited ability to absorb new ideas and initiatives, and a need for arguments to be crafted in a way that's sensitive to that. Now, all of this looking inward need not necessarily be a deterrent to arguing for the right thing, but it may imply different strategies for catalyzing actors within the government to do the right thing. And in that vein, I want to talk about two broad issue areas. I want to first talk about the problem of Iran, and then I want to talk about the humanitarian challenge with Camp Ashraf. And as I said, you know, the interesting opportunity that we have that I think falls on very fertile soil in the American political debate is that there is no disagreement about the nature of the Iranian regime. It is abhorrent. And it is not simply abhorrent from a values perspective in terms of the gross violations of human rights and the authoritarian nature of the rule, but it is a real threat to American security, to the security of many of our friends, and to international peace and stability. So there's strong agreement on that fact, but there are also many regimes that fall into a similar category of being abhorrent and being threats to international peace and security. And simply because we can identify a regime as a problem doesn't easily suggest the right and most effective solution to that problem. So one of the caveats that I want to offer as we think about a future free Iran, a future democratic Iran, a future Iran in which Secretary West can walk the streets and greet Iranians again, is that when you look historically at the U.S. experience with regime change, we have many, many, many different models. We have the model of the Cold War, in which the United States chose to deter and chose to poke and prod through proxies and waited and waited and waited and waited. And depending on whether you were a refusenik in Moscow or whether you were a European on the border or whether you were an American, you may have very different views about the relative success and the cost-benefit trade-off of that kind of an approach. There are many other approaches too. You know, in 1954, we launched a coup in Guatemala, and you can have very strong differences of opinion about how that worked out. If you think about the political context in which Ambassador Rees worked, where in Northern Ireland we had a long-standing conflict that had political and military dimensions in which the United States diaspora community played a significant role, that also took a long time and led to a negotiated solution. Again, depending on where you sit, that has very different degrees of attractiveness or repulsiveness. And finally, as I mentioned, in the context of forcible regime change, very uncertain results. The United States, I think, in both Afghanistan and Iraq has learned that war often has many unintended consequences, and that the need for sustained and comprehensive nation-building post-conflict can be a real deterrent to the political impetus for decision, certainly at this historical moment. So one of the challenges for this community and for us all going forward is to help think creatively about what I have heard this community describe as the third way. If the argument to a country that is at risk of strategic overreach and in budgetary crisis is one that can assuage many of its concerns and that can posit a route to change that is sustainable and effective, that's extremely important and valuable. And the language that is used by this community about the third way is very attractive language. And so one of the challenges is to flesh that out and to explain in greater detail second and third order consequences, the specifics of how you would achieve it, the groundwork for moving forward in this alternative that reflects where Washington is today and offers a pragmatic and hopeful future for your movement, your cause, and for Iranians in the country and worldwide. But secondly, I think the humanitarian issues are ones in which there is broad consensus. And again, not a simple set of solutions. I think we tend to forget that questions about legal status of persons inside borders, that questions about international reach of national courts are very complicated questions that can be used as precedents that can be not preferable in other contexts. And so the academic in me that seeks consistency and seeks to look at the long-term benefits of different courses of action cautions us to not downplay the complexities that you all live and breathe vis-a-vis Camp Ashraf. But at base, it's very, very simple. And this is, I think, the strongest point to move forward at this moment, because we are at risk of an extraordinary humanitarian crisis by the end of this year unless we are able to rally the international community to step up to the plate. And here I do think the United States bears a special responsibility. I do not think that we can, regardless of the legality, hide behind Iranian sovereignty to escape the moral obligation that comes from the history that we have had with Camp Ashraf. That is a significant concern. And the cold-blooded murder of unarmed people is wrong no matter where it happens and no matter who commits it. It is simply wrong. It is anti-democratic, it is anti-American, it is against international law, it is wrong. And so that piece is very, very simple. Now, a lot of my work has been on preventing mass atrocity. And people can debate what constitutes a mass atrocity, whether it's 600 people being killed, whether it's the 3 people in your family, whether it's 10 million. I don't care. Mass atrocity is the slaughter of unarmed civilians. That is what has happened in Camp Ashraf, and it is wrong. And I commend to you a small book on mass atrocity response operations that I put together with some colleagues from the U.S. Peacekeeping Institute. It's available on the web, but it talks about the challenges of responding to mass atrocity. And here, I think, is a place for us to roll up our sleeves and dig in. Because responding to mass atrocity is a uniquely complicated challenge, and the work that we have done on it suggests that if you fail to plan ahead, you will be very negatively surprised, and that the process of planning ahead can serve to galvanize attention and really focus policymakers in a way that abstract arguments don't. So one of the things that I've done in my work on mass atrocity response is, with the help of Mission Essential personnel, who has provided us with pro bono technical assistance to develop tabletop exercises, we have taken scenarios and walked people through what various crises could look like and what the specifics of response are, and considered these from the political level down to the logistics level, and tried to identify the types of activities that can be taken earlier to avoid the problem getting worse, and how to be most effective in response. This is a very powerful tool for focusing attention and for galvanizing resources and commitment. And I think it is a place that the Camp Ashraf impending crisis cries out for analysis. And I would urge you to spend some time trying to think in very concrete terms about what would be required in the event that a political solution is not attained beforehand. So I guess what I would like to say in conclusion is that I do see a very special American responsibility to ensure the safety of those in Camp Ashraf until their final status is determined. And clearly it needs to be a priority to determine that final status, to work not simply with our erstwhile allies, the Iraqi government, which has been perpetrating these crimes, but also with our European friends and the international community. Because sovereignty is an important value, but it's not the only value, and the practice of foreign policy is about reconciling competing values. And here, in the case of our interests and our humanitarian values, we have a very clear call to action to focus attention on this and do it now. And if values and interests, when combined, are the most powerful call to action, you have an extraordinary narrative to tell. It needs to be explained in a way that can be heard in the context of a town and a country that is dealing with many challenges. But you have humanitarian arguments on your side, you have values on your side, and they call for action in the context of very clear American interests in ultimately changing the nature of Iranian governance to allow for democracy and freedom for the Iranian people. And so I look forward to continuing the dialogue with you about, practically speaking, how we might do that. Thank you very much.